What's up, everybody? Welcome to Don't Give Up with Jacob. Today, I have a special guest joining me on my show. Not only that, but she's also a therapist. So please give a warm welcome to Erica Spring.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jacob.
Anytime. Welcome to my show, Spring. I'm so glad that you're able to come today. Have a lot to ask you about your life.
Well, let's get into it. I've had a bit of a bit of one. Yeah.
Very well, then. So, I want you to give a little introduction about yourself and tell my audience what you do for a living and what inspired you to start this type of work.
You bet. So I am a licensed therapist, and for all intents and purposes, I always have to just say anything that I talk about when I'm not being your therapist or someone else's therapist is for entertainment and information purposes only. But I am a licensed therapist here in Missouri. I offer telehealth because well, later on, we'll get into why I chose telehealth, and it definitely has to do with my autism diagnosis. I am also a writer. I am a budding podcaster. One day I hope to be just like this guy. Amazing, Jacob. I'm a mom of two. I'm a wife, and I'm also on the spectrum.
Nice. Definitely sounds like there's a lot going on. And speaking of being on the spectrum, what kind of being on the spectrum ability do you have? Like maybe you have
Yeah.
autism or ADHD or something like that?
So I'm a late diagnosed because I am probably old enough to be your mother. When I was a kid, girls were not diagnosed with autism. And so most of us were given the designation of gifted. So that was actually my first designation at like 4 years of age. They were testing my IQ, and I had a very expanded vocabulary for somebody my age, and I read early. However, I did have a lot of behavior issues. I had to be in isolation a lot. I would have meltdowns. I had a lot of sensory issues. I was constantly covering my ears because everything hurt. I couldn't wear blue jeans because it hurt, but at the time there was no word for it. So I just was in a lot of now they would be IEP classes, but back then they called them gifted classes. But it was basically self-contained classrooms with other kids who are kind of like me working at our own pace. So I did not get officially diagnosed until I was in my 40s, which sounds kind of silly, being a therapist, but kind of how it came to be was my son is on the spectrum and my son has ADHD. And when I was talking to his team early on with his diagnostics, some of the things that they were explaining about his, I was like, wait, this sounds like things that I would do. And so I explained that, and they're like, well, it's genetic. So what do you think? And then I'm starting to look at like my family. I have a professor aunt. She's brilliant. I have an uncle who is brilliant, but nobody's seen him since like 1985 because he doesn't like to be around people. And the more I started thinking about it and kind of reflecting on all of those sensory issues, communication issues, social issues, I finally reached out and made the big girl decision of getting myself assessed. And it came back that I'm considered level one. I think in the old days, I would have been diagnosed with Asperger's. So I also have ADHD. So I'm considered to be twice exceptional, which sounds way cooler than what it is. But it's a person who is gifted in one or more areas, but also has neurodivergent traits. And so when I was growing up, the assumption was as long as you had good grades and as long as you behaved, you were fine. Now, what we have since found is that especially women and young girls, we don't have a problem with our academics and we don't have a problem with our behavior. And because of masking, most of us can fit in. So I'm really passionate now about being open and upfront about what we look like, what we sound like, and that there really is a whole generation of us who are probably walking around without a proper diagnosis.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like you've been through a lot. I've been through some similar struggles. Like, I
Yes.
was originally diagnosed as developmentally delayed, unbelievably, and then we moved to another state, and that's when I got diagnosed with autism. It was like we put together a huge puzzle, figuring out what was going on with me and why I was acting in ways that seemed different to other kids.
Yes. How old were you when you were diagnosed, Jacob?
I was in about first grade, the last quarter of first grade when we first moved, and that's when I got diagnosed with autism. I
Yeah.
didn't know it at first since they were um having me in this office and they were having me do kinds of puzzles and mazes and asking me questions. And I
Absolutely.
didn't know that they were actually testing me. I thought it was all fun and games.
Yeah, and it was. But it does tell us a lot and I'm really, really glad that your parents had the wherewithal to advocate and get that done. I do, as a therapist and as a parent, often hear other parents saying, "Well, I don't want my kid to have a label." And I'm like, it's not a label, first of all. Your kid is your kid. A diagnosis isn't going to change them, but it could change their life. When I look back to little Erica, I wish that there would have been help for her because she did not know that there was a name for what she was going through. I thought everybody struggled with loud noises. I thought everybody couldn't eat certain foods because it felt weird. I thought everybody was pretending to be somebody else when they were around other people. But something that is kind of interesting is I had a lot of selective mutism. Um, I'm the oldest of two, and my younger sister actually did most of my talking. I talked very, very well, but I would not speak with anybody that I did not know. And I still struggle with it to this day. If I get emotionally or sensory overwhelmed, some people call it shutdown. It's not, it's a selective mutism. Sometimes my words just don't come.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I like to call those kinds of situations sensory overload, where it just
Yes.
feels like there's too much going on inside
Yeah,
my brain and the world, and I just can't handle it. But I just need some time to be in a quiet space and relax and calm down to help myself get back on track.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, I had a lot of meltdowns growing up. We didn't know that they were meltdowns, but I would be really, really inconsolable for a long time, much more. And they were never, there's a difference just for educational purposes. There's a difference between a tantrum. A tantrum is a behavior that a child or a toddler or even an adult will exhibit because they want to get something or avoid something. Okay. So, the metaphor of like the child in the grocery store who wants the cookie and then they start screaming and they throw themselves on the ground because they want that cookie. And hopefully the parent doesn't give them the cookies so that they don't get reinforced. A meltdown is like what you're saying, a sensory overload. I call it like everything gets too loud, everything gets too much. And so a meltdown can look like a tantrum because there may be crying, there may be obstinance, there may be all the way up to some people struggle with maintaining safety in their body. They self-injure, they bite, they headbang. But they're not trying to achieve anything but homeostasis. They're not trying to get something. They're not looking for a cookie. They're actually looking to just be somehow regulated.
Wow. That definitely sounds like a lot. I never even knew there was an actual difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. So that
Yes.
actually explains a lot. Like when people have meltdowns, it doesn't mean that they're acting up or going out of control. It just means that they're overwhelmed and upset and frustrated because that's how I get sometimes. So I definitely understand.
Yes. Yes. When we're given the language, I do think that It doesn't necessarily change how society sees the behavior, but I think that it can help remove some of the shame. I'm an adult, I'm a grown up, I'm a licensed therapist, and I still have meltdowns.
Yeah, things definitely do not go my way either, and sometimes I'm breaking down, but I just have to help get myself back on track by taking deep breaths, taking a break, and
That's
doing
the big
something I
thing.
love to help myself get back on track.
That's right. That's right. And I think a lot of people don't completely understand why we need so much isolation, and quiet. It doesn't mean that we're not social, but it does mean that most of us do require to be separated from a lot of activity so that we can engage in either our stems or our uh, the things that make us happy. For me, I am a compulsive reader. My special interest is taking data. I love learning facts and just keeping it, as well as dinosaurs in space. I did get some of that. When I was like in elementary school, I would refuse to read any fiction, and I still do because I laugh, Jacob. I tell people fiction is lying because it's all made up. Now, I laugh because I do enjoy the occasional fiction, but the root of me says, I don't want you to manipulate my feelings. I will tell you how I feel. So I stick to nonfiction because it's just data.
Sounds super interesting. I mean, I loved fiction books, especially
Yeah.
those with colorful illustrations and
Yes.
repetitive text. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to become an author and illustrator. Not only could I write and illustrate my own fictional children's books, but I could also give them a piece of my creativity and my
That's
skills of writing and illustrating while entertaining kids at the same time.
I love that. And again, tongue in cheek, I think the preference, it's there. When I talk to other people on the spectrum, there's a clear like divide. There's like super fantasy, wanting to do the role plays, wanting to do, LARPing, wanting to do D&D, wanting to just be in that fantasy hero, superhero, manga, anime. Now, I think again, this is where a lot of the data sometimes misrepresents women. Women do have different interests, and that's another reason why we tend to fly under the radar. As I got older, I developed a hyper interest in other humans. And what that turns into is somebody who watches people all the time and observes their body language and reads about humans. That's called psychology and sociology. And so, one of the reasons why I became a therapist is actually because my special interest was just studying humans. I love to detect patterns, and humans are some of the most predictable pattern creators ever. And so, I think, when we're looking at the kind of preferences that we have in our special interests, they are a lot of gender specifics when we're talking about these things.
Oh,